Well, hello. I've got Dr. Marcus Bussey with me, and I'm very happy to be have been asked to talk about your new book, which is quite special to you.
Yeah.
It's Neohumanism Yearning and Becoming: Essays on Education and Spirituality. And the time that we have together, I'd like to cover a little bit about the past and the present and the future. That is, what brought you to the book and what made it special for you to actually create an expansive book which actually covers quite a few important categories that I think might in fact add to theory and actually expand upon uh, previous theorists in this space.
Yeah.
So Marcus, the first question is, what brought you to this book and helped you to begin?
Well, it's a long story, Colin. It's nice to be here, by the way. Thank you. And it's nice to also have the roles reversed, where you're asking the questions and not me. So, what brought me to the book? It's thinking and doing are things we do all our lives. And for me, I've always been called to explore what I feel are some of the central mysteries, just being me, first me, because it's all about me, isn't it? But it's also being us as a human being, as a species, and it's also being a we as us on the planet. And I've been aware of those kind of layers of identity from a very, very young age. And I've sort of explored, Christian thinking and experience. I've explored other areas of sort of, metaphysical thinking. As a kid, I started yoga when I was 13. I've always been a very casual yogi in the sense that I'm not necessarily disciplined, but that was there from a very early age, and I can't explain how come or why, but it has been. And what that led me to do when I hit sort of slightly end of my teens and going into university sort of period was to look at some of the great traditions of Western thinking through the university system, So I did a lot of stuff on medieval and Reformation thinking and theology. I looked at, also some of the very structural Marxist type work as well. Because I felt that we are both structured beings and we're also something more that metaphysical in that sense, or spiritual. So I wanted to get a handle on both aspects. And then what happened is that over the years, I was also a musician and grew up in an art family. So I had all those provocations, you might say. And then, towards the end of my 20s, I was about 28, I came across this guy, Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, and his movement, Ananda Marga, and I started reading him and I started thinking, this sort of integrates care for the physical world, the social responsibilities. It also brings together aesthetics. It brings together also a spiritual practice, a meditation practice as well. But also meditation for Sarkar has always been much more than just sitting cross-legged and sort of, doing a mantra or whatever. It's meditation in life, that life actually crafts and hones and also brings purpose to the meditation, but also takes the meditation into the doing. It's very active. And one of the terms that he used was neo-humanism, which is kind of like an expanded universalism. So he starts off talking in the 1950s about universalism as a spiritual calling, and in the 80s he reframed it as neo-humanism. And that really struck me because, as I say in the book, I did a whole bunch of stuff on the Renaissance humanists and so on, and my honours thesis was on a humanist. So I was really interested, and I thought, humanism, neo-humanism, what does this mean? So I started exploring that, and it's all about the relational nature of human consciousness. So that's kind of like the arc that brought me to neo-humanism, a term that means something to me because it means biographically or autobiographically, it's relevant to my earlier work. It's about being human, but it's about redefining our humanness and saying, okay, I'm human because there's a tree over there and there's a wallaby outside my window and I've got a guitar here and I've got all those books there with all those human voices in all of those books. We're all in a conversation, a relational flow or flux, which is way bigger than anything that I can intellectually grasp, but I can feel it. And that's the other aspect in human. You have to feel it. So that's kind of it for me, Colin.
Well, I mean, the arc that you're talking about there, and you're going through the 80s and coming through to today, and actually saying, look, you have to feel it. That meditation isn't just a practice of sitting cross-legged on the floor, but it's actually about your experience in life. So, how is neo-humanism? And can you define that word? What does that mean, neo-humanism? And how is that relevant to today in terms of perhaps some other domains, not just our lifestyle, but perhaps politics, perhaps emerging issues?
Yeah. Okay, define neo-humanism. It's an integration of Western humanist thought, which goes back about 500 or 600 years, which said all human beings are equal. We're one human family. Of course, they didn't live up to that back then. They were still, enslaving black people and exploiting Indians and whatever else, around the planet. Indigenous people got a really short stick. So humanism was always an aspirational element. But then it encounters, in Sarkar's work, an Eastern tantric kind of understanding of the human being as a process. There's a pragmatism to this tantric thinking that Sarkar promoted. And I'm now using the word in the Western philosophical sense of the pragmatism, is that we are processes engaged with other processes in the world. So that meaning grows out of our relationships. It's not this kind of isolated Cartesian ego where we are separate individuals. I am because you are. It's that sort of type of thinking, which of course is not just an Indian thought, it's very much an indigenous thought as well, an understanding of how life works. So neo-humanism then is humanism reconceptualized or reinvigorated by an encounter with non-Western understandings of the human as a process, an engaged relational dynamic, which has spiritual implications, because to understand how that dynamic really functions, we need to be working on our own spiritual awareness of relationship. And to me, spirituality is a relational awareness of our placement within a cosmic context, bigger than us.
Right. So neo-humanism is about our inner selves as well. It's about the human being as a process evolving, but having that spiritual dimension to get in touch with in that inner self. So it's not just some kind of inner strategic work, it's actually getting in touch with our relationships.
Yeah, I mean, one of those sorts of little nuggets that Sarkar was always apt to come out with, he said, look, it's subjective approach with objective adjustment. Subjective approach is that inner stuff, and the objective is obviously the relationship we have with the world. And we can find this in many relational philosophers, the new materialist philosophers, the object-oriented and ontology philosophers, and so on. I find it in work of people like Karen Barad, who's written some beautiful stuff on the relational nature of materiality itself. But that's me going off on my sort of more intellectual academic type of tangent. But the reality is that you don't need to sort of sign up and become a neo-humanist. I think there are many people on the planet who are in that space. It's just a term that I find useful when I'm describing the intercivilizational nature of the realities that we are facing globally. And you asked to sort of take that into this concept, into rethinking or thinking about politics or whatever.
Yeah, I did, mate. So, the kind of question I saved up for you was that given the current climate social fragmentation, ecological distress, and a collective search for purpose that's now widespread in the world as postmodern media is dividing us all up into these social media camps and creating a sense of division. How do you think neo-humanist thinking, especially ideas like yoga, which you describe in the book I read as prama, how does aesthetic living, prama joy, how does it speak to the challenges that we're facing right now?
Well, that's a very good question. And how does it speak? Well, for me, the first thing is that it makes the world that we're in a world of conscious deliberation about what kind of futures do we want? What are the futures we're called to? And because this is a relational philosophy of love, it's about the relationship of love, obviously not the romantic sort of love. It's the sense of I love this world that I'm in and I care for it, and I care for everything from the smallest up to the to the sort of the planetary as well. Somehow there's a relationship that's effective there. It affects here,
and that's great for our near-term futures, our immediate relationship to what's happening today.
Yeah.
And can I also ask you about perhaps the future then, applying neo-humanism ahead? So looking ahead, how might neo-humanism help shape the kind of futures that we need, ones that are more inclusive, conscious, and compassionate? So what role do education, inner change, and spiritual insight play in that vision today, particularly as we're going ahead? Every 4 years we have elections and we've got to search our soul for values and listen to external speakers who have got different worldviews. And we've got to assess them in terms of whether they're being, too mean, or whether they're being, whether they have spirituality. So how do we know? How do we apply humanism into the future?
Wow. Yeah, you got about 10 questions there, Colin. I'm trying to sort of keep track of them.
We've got 10 minutes. Let's see how we go.
Let's see. So first of all, neo-humanism, because it focuses on our internal structures in relation to the external, I think it's really empowering. So the first thing when we face the complex uncertainties that we're facing today, it's empowering because we don't feel we have to do it all ourselves. We understand that we're part of a relational process that's challenging our consciousnesses, plural, across the planet. Everybody, every day, makes decisions about what is going on, about what they want, who do they care for, whose tribe are we part of, and so on. So, is it just my family? I've got to make sure they're safe. So I've got to get all the money I can and get, the kind of education that will control things. Or is it my community? Or is it the nation state? Or is it the planet? And what about the trees and the frogs? So that kind of consciousness stuff is something that we're all part of, and I have a role to play, no matter how small I might feel I am. One person. I can't make, would it appear, I can't make much of a difference. Those guys over there, Donald Trump or whoever it might be, they're rattling sabers and they're making a lot of noise. They seem to be having a big impact. Me, I'm just Marcus, sitting up here in, Queensland, Australia. But that's the wrong way to think about it, because consciousness doesn't work like that. One of the things about meditating for so long, looking at the way, because I'm a historian as well, so looking at the way things have changed, sometimes it's just the little things. So we call them in future, don't we, weak signals and so on. Yes. So weak signals are emitting sometimes quite powerful but undetected possibilities. And I see consciousness as like that. And each one of us, whenever we have a conversation, whenever we make a choice, is emitting those signals. Now, towards the end of the book, I start calling them that pheromones. They're like pheromones. These little signals, you're chasing it this way or that way. These futures pheromones are there because yearning matters. What do we, as individuals, but also as a species, yearn for? From a Sarkarian perspective, we're yearning to return home. that home is cosmic. So the purpose of meditation is to streamline your consciousness so that you become more aligned with that returning home, whatever that might mean in terms of material, in terms of spiritual, psychological, and so on, ethical. It means it has implications all over the place. And those implications can show up in economics, in environmentalism, in politics, and so on. So we have elections coming up, as you point out. Yeah, we do. Are they really aligned to those so-called leaders? But they're more like managers in actual fact, trying to manage a complex situation, but also trying to point score. So it always comes down to sort of small egos and personalities and so on, which distract us as a voting public. We need another kind of politics, actually. So neo-humanism would say we need another kind of politics. What does that look like? Well, it has to be inclusive. It has to be distributive. We have to have, a whole range of, I think, clear, locally relevant contexts functioning. And I think, given the kind of global distress we're facing, some of that is going to appear in much more grounded grassroots type activities. Going to appear also, there's a lot of creative stuff going on everywhere. I'm constantly coming across it. Listened to a podcast this morning, Kate Rawsworth talking about donut economics, and and all these places around the globe that are picking up on an idea that's more equitable, it's more ethically distributive and inclusive, and so on. She would never call herself a neo-humanist, nor would I want to impose that title on her. It's just, for me, that term works. It works because of my own intellectual growth and also the way I sit within a spiritual discourse that's basically centered around the work of Prabhupada Ranjan Saka. Okay? But, and I'm now trying to think, where did you go next with your questions? But you can remind me by asking me again. Pick up some of the elements that I haven't touched on.
Okay. Can I just read a small section from your book? This is from page 178. And it picks up that neo-humanist teaching conveys a sense of rightness and joy to the hearts and minds of children by linking tradition, continuity, and change as meaningful and sustainable engagement with life. Thus, living becomes an aesthetic expression of human potential. The founder of neo-humanism, P.R. Sarkar, emphasised the importance of aesthetic science, both as a measure of our humanity and as a force taking us deeper into the spiritual core of our being. Now, aesthetics describes relationship, as you say here, lying at the heart of culture. It's the outward expression of our humanity. Thus, to take the measure of someone or a society, we must look at their actions. And this is, I'll just add this, he said that the quintessence of aesthetic science is to get joy and to give joy. And as we all proceed through life, we need to use this as a measure of our own success. And as teachers, a life without joy is one of quiet desperation, and it's ultimately unsustainable. So to be a humanist or neo-humanist teacher is to engage with sustainable activity joyously and to energetically draw others into the same path. And then he starts to talk about educational sustainability. And that's where I wanted to talk, to bring you in that last part of the question is in terms of sustainability for the planet, for society, and even economically. There is that balancing act of joy that we should give and that we should receive as part of that sustainability. So how does that work with what you're saying there about the different worldviews of the political parties?
Oh, okay. First of all, I would want to say that, and this is before we look at the political parties, that joy acts as an attractor, and that to live joyless lives leads one into a kind of materialist malaise where it's about more about gratification than about joy. Joy is not, yippee, I'm feeling really cool today. It's more like there's this sense of rightness, and as I say there, it's an aesthetics. Now, aesthetics is not just about a good painting or a good piece of music or something. It's actually a kinesthetic, physical thing that we respond to. And all the chemicals in our body that we emit, or our hormones, are producing hormonal and therefore emotional responses that will either draw us into the world in an expansive heart way, optimistic way, a way that instills hope, or it will create fear and this contraction of identity, okay, which is we would associate with what you might call hyper-individualism or something like that. So that leads us into the politics. Because if you have a hyper-fearful individualism, that's all about me or us as opposed to them, our politics is going to be reductive and it's going to be focused on what I would call the mean, the petty, the selfish. Both parties are saying, oh, we'll give you $1,000 for this. Oh, I'm going to do better, says Peter Dunn. I'm going to give you $1,200 for that, if you vote for us. This kind of, that doesn't make any sense to me, other than that I can say it makes sense within the current political environment of selfish identity politics. But it's not actually
a central position. Neohumanism is a central position between, say, the Greens, Labor, Liberal, perhaps even a Democratic Party. It's actually
and
trying to be centrist, and lead us to sustainability.
So, what is sustainability then? Well, it's a word that means multiple things, and it kind of, at some senses, it doesn't mean anything at all. Because it might mean business sustainability, which just means let's keep the businesses going because they're producing certain kinds of things that maintain the world that we're looking at behind you there, that photograph of Brisbane, for instance. But, that's not real sustainability. Sustainability, and I'm thinking of the work of Kimberly Cummerus here, she talks about regenerative consciousness in a sense, and it's about moving beyond sustainability as maintaining a bottom line, and taking it into growth, but not growth economically as measured through the GDP, but as in growth through our relationships with a healthy world, with a healthy social world, ecological world, but also inner world, this is spiritual, the sense of soul or identity that we carry. So the regenerative is what is missing from dominant political discourse, okay? Neohumanism is one way of underscoring that absence from dominant there. And that means when I go out into the world every day, I'm teaching or whatever I'm doing, I'm taking that sense of the regenerative, which is communal. It's about spreading joy. One of the things that I'm very, very alert to is the fact that joy, there is a politics of joy, okay? And I write about that in that book on phenomenologies of grace. In the introduction, I talk about the politics of joy because it destabilizes this dog-eat-dog, petty, individualist, micro kind of politics that we associate with what we would call democracy. But, it's a very fragile democracy that we have today, and we know it's fragile now because we see authoritarianism and fascism rising up again. But it's also an anorexic understanding of democracy where really I'm just being lazy and I vote some person in for 4 years and they make all the decisions, so I can just get on watching TV or playing computer games, or I'll play the guitar or whatever, but so that we kind of offloading responsibility. And then we complain when things aren't going the way because we've got somebody we can complain. But that's not democracy as I would call it. I'm thinking now of Clem Beazold and the work that he and Jim Data and others did in the 70s on anticipatory democracy. It was a fantastic sort of imaginative, bubbling, enthusiastic period where, all this stuff was coming up. And now we've got anorexic democracy. And what do we do with that? Well, I think we have to take it back. I think neohumanism also places an ethical responsibility on us to be joyful, and to understand that the future is made by us, which is why The three words in my title for that book are Neohumanism, then yearning. What do we yearn for? We yearn for community. We yearn to belong and to have a love affair with the world. And becoming, because every day we make choices, and every day we become what our choices indicate. More selfish, more materialistic, more altruistic, and of course I'm binarizing it, but you know, you've got that whole spectrum there. And to me, that's what that book is trying to touch on. And in a way that makes people curious, want to get involved. You can smell joy and love in practice. That's it, in practice.
That's great, Marcus. I'm not sure if I can add much more to that. I'm, thinking that neo-humanism helps us to reprioritize, so that we're not putting economics and environment first, but we're putting people first, and then trying to create a better world that we're part of, that
Yeah.
have a central role in, that is sustainable.
Yeah.
Whether that's housing affordability, whether that's climate justice, or so I would probably just say that I appreciate your work, that it doesn't just critique, but it heals, and that where much of critical theory rightly asks us to deconstruct systems, your writing invites us to reconnect with ourselves, with each other, and with a deeper sense of purpose. So neo-humanism, Yearning and Becoming, feels like a guide not only for reimagining education and spirituality, but for sustaining joy amidst really difficult times, sustaining meaning for ourselves amidst this new environment of social media and being bombarded with messages from different people. Instead of being overwhelmed, neo-humanism and your book gives us the resources to actually make sense of the world for ourselves, and in a way that guides us towards a more spiritual existence, a regenerative, but also more peaceful. And so wonderful to spend half an hour with you, Marcus. I wish I could ask you a lot more questions, and perhaps at another time.
We can keep the conversation going, Colin.
Yeah.
For me, it is about, your summary is a really nice way of saying it. It's moving from critique to regeneration. We need critique, of course, but it's very easy to throw rocks at the tanks, but the tanks will keep on rolling, unless we do something else. So we need to then start building alternative futures, and that's really part of what that book's all about. Yeah.
Wow, it is a great read, and I'm sure people will enjoy, when they're soul searching themselves and they find something in one of those passages, it will really help them to, create some intestinal fortitude and respond with confidence to some of these amazing issues that we're seeing around the planet at the moment.
Yeah,
so.
It's a spectacularly bizarre period, but there's a reason behind it. Something's happening. Who knows what it is, Colin? But yeah, thank you for talking with me, and I do appreciate it. No,
it's a wonderful opportunity to get in touch with one of the world's great spiritual teachers in this regard, and not only that, a formal lecturer as well. So good to be with you. What a great futurist you are, and inspiration for a lot of the futurists, but also just anyone wanting to pick up your book and gain some spiritual advice. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks, Tim.